It was a sweltering July evening when I pulled up to my parents' house for summer break. After 3 years of college, these visits had become a monotonous routine. Mom's suffocating hugs, Dad's clumsy shoulder pats, and the endless questions about my studies that never quite hid their underlying disinterest. "Amelia, sweetheart," Mom called from the porch, her voice a little too high-pitched. "You're just in time for dinner, and guess who's coming over?" Like I needed to guess. It was always the same. Eleanor, my older sister, and her husband Mark, made it their mission to grace us with their presence whenever I was home. A not-so-subtle reminder of their picture-perfect life, I guess. Sure enough, 2 hours later, we were all gathered around the dining table. Mom had even used her special occasion tablecloth, the one with the delicate lace that only saw the light of day when Eleanor was around. "Mark and I have been thinking," Eleanor announced, setting down her fork with the dramatic flair she'd perfected over the years. "We should all go to Hawaii for Christmas." Mom practically squealed with delight, clapping her hands like a giddy teenager. "Oh, that would be wonderful," Dad beamed, radiating pride. "Fantastic idea, sweetheart." Then, Eleanor turned to me, that familiar smirk playing on her lips. "Amelia, do you think you can afford it? Or should Big Sister help you out?" I felt my face flush, but I kept my voice steady. "I can manage my own expenses, thanks." "Are you sure?" Eleanor raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Because we're looking at about $3,000 per person for flights and hotel." I nearly choked on my water. $3,000? That was more than all my savings combined. I was barely scraping by on minimum wage from my part-time jobs. But I'd rather live on ramen noodles for the next 6 months than accept Eleanor's condescending charity. "I'll manage," I repeated, my voice firm. Eleanor shrugged, dismissing me, and turned back to our parents. "Well, anyway, the restaurant is doing amazing. We just hired a new sous chef from Italy, can you believe it? Authentic Italian cuisine right here in our little town." "You're so entrepreneurial, dear," Mom gushed. "Amelia, you should really take notes from your sister about business sense." "Yes, Amelia," Eleanor chimed in, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Maybe you could even work for me someday." Sitting at that dinner table, watching my parents fawn over Eleanor's Hawaii plans, I felt like I was 10 years old again. Nothing had changed. The same eager nods from Mom, the same proud smile on Dad's face, the same suffocating feeling of being invisible. Eleanor was still their golden child, just as she'd been since we were kids. The 6 years between us might as well have been 60 for all the difference it made in how our parents saw us. They never explicitly said it, but their actions spoke volumes. Eleanor was the one they believed in, the one destined for greatness. I was just there. They never outright said it, but it was always there, hanging in the air like unspoken words. Eleanor was the star, the shining example of their success as parents. Every accomplishment, no matter how small, was celebrated with fanfare. "Remember when Eleanor won that school science fair in 8th grade?" Dad would reminisce, his eyes twinkling. "We knew then she had that special something." The funny thing is, they weren't intentionally cruel. They never deliberately hurt me or put me down. They simply forgot I was there. Sometimes it felt like I was a ghost, a background character in the Eleanor show. They'd remember to ask about my grades or if I needed anything, but their eyes would always drift back to Eleanor, waiting for her next grand achievement to celebrate. Thank the spirits for Grandpa Charles. He lived in that big old house on Elm Street, the one with the wraparound porch and the rusty swing set. He was the only one who seemed to have enough love for both of us. A successful businessman himself, he'd promised early on to pay for both our college educations. When Eleanor left for college, I was 13. I foolishly thought things might change. Finally, I'd get my chance to bask in the spotlight, to be the daughter they doted on. Boy, was I wrong. Eleanor just called. Mom would burst into my room, practically vibrating with excitement. She's joined the debate team. "We should drive up this weekend to see her." "A breakfast visit," Dad would suggest. "We can take her some extra money for expenses." They'd spend hours on Skype with her, the laptop perched precariously on the kitchen counter while they cooked dinner. Eleanor's voice would fill the house, her presence looming large even in her absence. Meanwhile, I'd slip out the back door and head to Grandpa Charles's house. Those afternoons at Grandpa's became my sanctuary, a refuge from the constant reminders of my second-class status. We had our own little routine that felt more like home than my actual home ever did. We'd settle into his worn leather armchair, a tub of butter pecan ice cream between us, and watch old westerns on his ancient TV. "You know what's great about The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Amelia?" he'd say, pausing the movie. "It's not about the obvious hero. It's about the quiet ones who do the right thing when nobody's looking." Other days, we'd order a pepperoni pizza, and he'd tell me stories about his own childhood while we played checkers. He taught me how to fish, too, taking me out on weekends to the creek behind his house. "The thing about fishing, Amelia," he'd say, patiently helping me bait my hook, "is that the best fish aren't always the ones making the biggest splash. Sometimes it's the quiet ones, swimming deep, that turn out to be the most special." I'd sit there in his little fishing boat, watching the sunlight dance on the water, and feel like maybe, just maybe, I didn't need to be the favorite to be loved. Grandpa Charles had a way of making me feel seen without making a big production out of it. "Want to watch Singing in the Rain again?" he'd ask after a long day of fishing. "I bought those ginger cookies you like." Those moments weren't grand or flashy like Eleanor's achievements. They were quiet, simple, and real. While my parents were driving across state lines to deliver spending money to Eleanor, I was learning how to play poker with Grandpa Charles using jelly beans as chips. 5 years passed in a blur of family dinners and Eleanor's ever-growing list of accomplishments. She graduated college with honors, landed a high-paying job at a prestigious firm, and started dating Mark, who my parents instantly declared perfect for her. Meanwhile, I was quietly preparing for my own college journey, fueled by Grandpa Charles's unwavering belief in me. The day I left for college, Grandpa Charles hugged me tighter than he ever had before. His embrace felt different somehow, more urgent, more final. "I love you so much, Amelia," he whispered in my ear. "Never forget that." I laughed it off at the time. "Grandpa, you're acting like we'll never see each other again. I'll be home for Thanksgiving." He just smiled that gentle smile of his and patted my cheek. "Just remember what I said, kiddo." 2 months into my freshman year, Mom called. Her voice was shaky as she told me Grandpa Charles had died peacefully in his sleep. The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. I sat there on my dorm room bed, phone pressed to my ear, unable to process the words. The funeral was on a dreary, overcast day. After the service, we all gathered in Grandpa Charles's lawyer's office for the reading of the will. Eleanor sat primly in her designer black dress, while I fidgeted in the cheap, ill-fitting one I'd bought last minute. "To my daughter, Sarah," the lawyer read, "I leave the sum of $50,000. Mom nodded, squeezing Dad's hand. "To my granddaughter, Eleanor," the lawyer continued, "I leave the sum of $300,000. Eleanor's face lit up. She immediately turned to Mark, who'd been hovering by her side throughout the funeral. "Baby, we can have that dream wedding now and still have enough to start our restaurant." "And to my granddaughter, Amelia," the lawyer continued, "I leave my house on Elm Street, including all its contents and the surrounding property." The room went silent for a moment before Eleanor burst out laughing. "Oh my God, Amelia got the old house. That's hilarious." She wiped tears of mirth from her eyes. "Don't worry, sis. Maybe you can sell it and buy yourself something nice, though I doubt anyone would want that creaky old place." "Eleanor," Mom scolded half-heartedly, but she was already smiling at her elder daughter's amusement. "We'll have the wedding in the spring," Eleanor announced, completely taking over the somber moment. "Mark and I already have the perfect business plan for an authentic Italian restaurant. This is exactly the capital we needed." True to her word, Eleanor threw herself into wedding planning. It was a spectacular affair: white doves, ice sculptures, a 5-tier cake, and what felt like half the town in attendance. I stood next to her in a bridesmaid dress she'd chosen, watching her marry Mark in what Mom called the social event of the season. Before their honeymoon tan had even faded, Eleanor and Mark opened their restaurant. They called it La Dolce Vita, the sweet life. The local paper did a feature on them, praising the young entrepreneurs for bringing authentic Italian cuisine to our small town. Mom and Dad framed the article and hung it in their living room. Meanwhile, I tried to figure out what to do with my inheritance. The property taxes weren't insignificant, and maintaining that big old house wouldn't be cheap. After crunching the numbers one weekend, I thought I'd found a solution. At the next family dinner, I decided to bring it up. "I've been thinking about the house," I said, trying to sound confident as I pushed my overcooked broccoli around my plate. "Since I'm at college most of the year, I could rent it out. That would help cover the taxes and maintenance." The silence that followed made me look up. Mom and Eleanor were exchanging one of their looks, the kind that had always spelled trouble for me growing up. Mark suddenly became very interested in his mashed potatoes. "Oh, honey," Mom said in that patronizing tone she reserved for when she thought I was being particularly dense. "Why would you want to rent to strangers when your sister and Mark need a place to live?" I blinked. "What?" Eleanor set down her wine glass with a delicate clink. "Well, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Mark and I could use the extra space, especially now that we're running the restaurant. And obviously, you're not going to charge rent from your own sister. I mean, that would be ridiculous, right, Mom?" "Of course it would," Mom agreed immediately. "Family helps family." And just like that, they turned back to their previous conversation about the restaurant's new wine list. Dad nodded along. Eleanor gestured animatedly about some expensive vintage she'd imported, and Mark finally looked up from his potatoes to join in. I sat there, fork suspended halfway to my mouth, as the reality of what had just happened sank in. I could protest, of course. I could point out that it was my house, my inheritance, my decision. I could remind them that Eleanor and Mark had just gotten a huge sum of money from Grandpa Charles's will, while I got, well, apparently nothing now. But I knew it wouldn't make any difference. They'd look at me with that familiar mixture of disappointment and annoyance they always wore when I didn't go along with their plans. Mom would sigh and remind me about family loyalty. Eleanor would make subtle jabs about my selfishness for weeks. Dad would give me that look, the one that said I was making things difficult for no good reason. So I did what I'd always done. I swallowed my protests, along with my now cold broccoli, and stayed quiet. The following weekend, Eleanor and Mark moved into my house. Eleanor sent me pictures of how they were updating the place. Grandpa Charles's old leather armchair, where we'd spent countless hours watching movies and sharing stories, was replaced by some modern monstrosity. His beloved fishing photos, each one a cherished memory of our time together, were taken down to make room for framed reviews of their precious restaurant. While I was crammed into a tiny dorm room, studying for midterms, my sister and her husband were living rent-free in my house, in my grandpa's house. Every time I came home for breaks, I had to ask permission to visit what was legally my own property. It was a constant gnawing reminder of their entitlement and my own powerlessness, but I refused to let them break me. I buried myself in my studies, determined to prove to myself and to them that I was more than just Eleanor's less successful sister. I took on extra shifts at the campus cafe and the library, barely having time to breathe. But every time I felt like giving up, I'd think about Hawaii, about the sun-drenched beaches, and the escape from their suffocating presence, and I'd push myself to pick up another shift. When Eleanor called in late November, I had the money ready. $3,000, nearly every penny I'd earned over the past few months. "Send it today," she instructed, her voice clipped. "I need to finalize the bookings." I transferred the money immediately, my hands shaking with a mixture of excitement and resentment as I clicked send on the banking app. That weekend, I even treated myself to a new swimsuit. Nothing fancy, just a simple blue one-piece on sale. My friend Lisa let me borrow her good suitcase, the one with the wheels that actually worked. December 23rd arrived, crisp and cold. I showed up at my parents' house with my borrowed suitcase and new swimsuit, practically buzzing with anticipation. But something felt off. Mom barely met my eyes when she hugged me, and Dad kept clearing his throat nervously. Then Eleanor and Mark arrived. The moment they walked in, I knew something was wrong. Eleanor had that smug look on her face, the The same one she'd worn when she told me she'd be living in my house rent-free. Mom and Eleanor exchanged glances that made my stomach churn. We sat down to dinner, and for a few agonizing minutes, there was only the sound of forks clinking against plates. Then, Eleanor set down her wine glass and cleared her throat. "We need to discuss something," she announced. "The restaurant, well, we've hit a rough patch. The numbers aren't what we projected." Mom reached over and squeezed her hand supportively. I noticed she already knew what was coming. Of course she did. "We've had to make some tough decisions," Eleanor continued, her voice dripping with fake regret. "We've had to cut some expenses, including our contribution to the Hawaii trip budget." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "So," she went on, gesturing between herself, Mark, and our parents, "we've all discussed it, and we think the best solution is for Amelia to sit this one out." The room started spinning. "But I already paid my share," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "Yes, well," Eleanor smiled, that condescending smile I knew so well. "That money will help cover the rest of our expenses. We couldn't possibly cancel on everyone, and Mark and I never even had a proper honeymoon because we went straight into the restaurant business." I looked at Mom and Dad, waiting for them to say something, to object to this blatant injustice. But they just sat there, Mom still patting Eleanor's hand, Dad studying his plate as if it held the secrets of the universe. "I paid my share," I repeated, my voice shaking. $3,000. That was all my savings." "Amelia!" Mom snapped, her tone sharp enough to make me flinch. "Family helps family. Eleanor and Mark are going through a difficult time with the restaurant. The least you can do is be understanding." "Understanding?" I whispered, the word catching in my throat. "Yes, understanding." "Besides," Mom added, her voice softening slightly, "someone needs to watch the house while we're gone." She then turned back to Eleanor, dismissing me completely. "Now, about the hotel arrangements." I stood up so abruptly my chair scraped against the floor. Nobody even looked up. I climbed the stairs to my old bedroom, the sounds of their cheerful conversation floating up behind me. They continued chatting and laughing, as if they hadn't just stolen my money and crushed my dreams. Lying in my childhood bed that night, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars Grandpa Charles had helped me stick on the ceiling years ago, I made a decision. They wanted to play dirty. Fine. Two could play at that game. The next morning, I played my part perfectly. I stood on the front porch, smiling and waving as they loaded their luggage into 2 waiting taxis. "Don't forget to water Mom's plants," Eleanor called out, adjusting her designer sunglasses. "And check the mail every day," Mom added. "Don't worry about a thing," I assured them, my smile unwavering. Eleanor leaned out the taxi window. "I'll send you lots of photos, so you won't feel left out." She laughed, as if she'd just made the funniest joke in the world. I kept waving until both taxis disappeared around the corner. Then, I walked straight to my car and drove to Grandpa Charles's house, my house. Eleanor and Mark's belongings were everywhere. Her clothes filled the closets Grandpa Charles's suits once occupied. Their pretentious art hung where his fishing photos used to be. Their wedding photos sat on the mantel where Grandpa Charles kept our cherished chess set. I started in the master bedroom, pulling out suitcases and boxes. Methodically, I packed everything: designer clothes, expensive shoes, Mark's custom-made suits. All of it went into boxes and bags. I found their important documents in Grandpa Charles's old study and packed those too. They wouldn't be needing those where they were going. The moving company charged me triple their usual rate for Christmas Eve service, worth every penny. My next stop was a 24-hour locksmith. He also charged a holiday premium, but I didn't care. I watched with grim satisfaction as he changed every lock in the house. I drove back to campus, arriving just as my friends were starting their Orphan Christmas celebration, our nickname for the holiday party we threw for students who couldn't or didn't want to go home. "Amelia," Lisa exclaimed when I walked in, "I thought you'd be in Hawaii by now." "Change of plans," I said, accepting the cup of hot chocolate she offered. "But you know what? I think I'm exactly where I need to be." For a week, my phone buzzed constantly with Eleanor's updates from Hawaii. Each notification felt like a deliberate jab to the ribs. "Living our best life," read the caption under a photo of Eleanor and Mark sipping cocktails on the beach. "Making memories with the people who matter most," accompanied a sunset dinner picture. My Instagram feed became a showcase of their perfect Hawaiian vacation. Eleanor lounging by infinity pools, Mom and Dad smiling at luau's, Mark attempting to surf. Every photo was carefully filtered and captioned with nauseating platitudes about family time and much-needed breaks from running a business. The worst was her post about knowing when to step back from work and enjoy life. That one came with a photo of all of them holding champagne glasses at a New Year's Eve party, paid for with my savings. Then, early on New Year's Day, my phone exploded. "Amelia, why are all of Eleanor's things in our living room?" Mom, "Call me immediately." Dad, "What the hell did you do with our stuff?" Eleanor, "The locks aren't working." "Did you change them?" Mark. I watched the messages roll in, my phone buzzing like an angry hornet. "This is completely unacceptable. Call us now." Mom, "If you don't bring the new keys right now, you'll regret this." Eleanor, "Amelia Elizabeth Parker, answer your phone this instant." Dad. The messages kept coming, growing increasingly angry. Words like ungrateful, selfish, and spiteful filled my screen. Eleanor's texts were particularly colorful, peppered with accusations about betraying the family and ruining their lives. "How dare you throw your own sister out on the street after everything we've done for you?" Mom, "You're just jealous because we got to go to Hawaii and you didn't." Eleanor, "This is the most selfish thing you've ever done." Dad, my phone showed 47 missed calls and over 100 messages by mid-morning. I read each one, letting their words wash over me without response. With each angry message, I felt lighter, freer. They could rage and threaten all they wanted. I wasn't that compliant little girl anymore. I put my phone on silent and went to get breakfast with my friends, leaving their messages unread and their calls unanswered. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel compelled to explain or justify myself to them. By evening, my phone showed over 200 missed calls. The constant buzzing had become white noise. But when Mom's name flashed across my screen for the 201st time, I finally answered. "How dare you?" Mom's voice exploded through the speaker before I could even say hello. "Do you have any idea what you've put your sister through, Amelia?" Dad's voice joined in from another extension. "This behavior is completely unacceptable." I sat cross-legged on my dorm room bed, surprisingly calm. "Is it? Like taking my $3,000 and going to Hawaii without me was acceptable?" "That was different," Mom spluttered. "The restaurant—" "No," I cut her off, my voice steady. "Let me talk. For once in my life, just let me talk." Amazingly, they fell silent. "You took my money I worked double shifts to earn. You let Eleanor and Mark live in my house rent-free while they ran their restaurant. You've always treated me like I was nothing compared to Eleanor. Always." "That's not," Dad started. "Remember my high school graduation?" I continued, my voice rising. "You left early because Eleanor called about a job interview. My college acceptance letter? You barely looked at it because Eleanor had just started dating Mark. Every achievement, every milestone in my life has been overshadowed by Eleanor's latest whatever." The words poured out of me, years of hurt and resentment finally finding their voice. "And then Hawaii. You didn't just take my money, you laughed about it. Eleanor sent me mocking photos. Do you have any idea how that felt? To know my own family could be so cruel?" The silence on the other end stretched out. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice softer, but still defensive. "Amelia, you have to understand. Eleanor and Mark are really struggling with the restaurant. They need help. And I needed parents who cared about me as much as they cared about Eleanor. I needed a sister who didn't treat me like a doormat. I needed a family who saw me as more than just Eleanor's backup plan." "But where will they live?" Mom's voice cracked. "They can live with you, just like they are now. Or they can rent an apartment like normal adults. My house isn't their safety net anymore. And starting next month, I'm renting it out to actual paying tenants." "You can't," Mom began. "I can and I will," I said firmly. "I've already talked to a property management company. The lease is being drawn up." I hung up before they could respond. 30 minutes later, my phone lit up with messages from Eleanor. "You vindictive witch," read the first one. "You've ruined everything. I hope you're happy now that you've destroyed our lives." Each message was nastier than the last, a stream of vitriol that would have devastated me a year ago. Now, I just turned off my phone and went to sleep. That was a year ago. I'm in my senior year now, and I haven't spoken to any of them since. Through the family grapevine, I hear things. The restaurant finally went under, capsizing under the weight of their mismanagement and extravagance. Eleanor and Mark are still living with our parents, supposedly regrouping before their next grand venture, no doubt hatching another scheme to exploit someone else's generosity. Meanwhile, the property management company I hired found excellent tenants for Grandpa Charles's house. The rent they pay covers the taxes with enough left over to build a decent savings account. I'm careful with the money, putting most of it away for a future that I will build for myself, brick by brick. I think Grandpa Charles would be proud of that. Sometimes, usually late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if we'll ever reconcile. If Mom will ever understand why I did what I did. If Eleanor will ever see me as an equal rather than a convenience. If Dad will ever stand up for me the way he always stood up for her. But then I remember that day in Hawaii, when they were all drinking champagne with my money, laughing and celebrating their perfect life, and I realized something. I don't need their understanding anymore. I don't need their approval, or their love, or their acceptance. What I need, what I finally have, is my self-respect. I have a life here at school, a life filled with friends who genuinely care about me, who celebrate my small victories and support me through the tough times. I have professors who challenge me and push me to be my best. I have goals and dreams that are entirely my own, not shaped by the expectations of others. And when I graduate this spring, I won't be going back to that town, to that suffocating atmosphere of favoritism and neglect. I'll be forging my own path, creating a life where I am valued for who I am, not for who I'm related to. I still visit Grandpa Charles's grave every few months. I tell him about my classes, my friends, my plans for the future. And sometimes, when the wind whispers through the trees, I imagine I can hear his voice, gentle and reassuring. "You're doing just fine, Amelia," he seems to say. Just fine. And for the first time in my life, I truly believe him. I am strong. I am resilient. I am enough. And I am finally free. Story 2. Every family drama narrative, I suppose, begins with everything being well until, well, my story isn't any different. Up until I reached 11, everything was pretty good. I'm Tasha, and I had a comfortable 2-story home with my parents back then. Although it was simple, it was home. To my child, at least, Mom and Dad appeared content. Ice. Despite being amicable, the divorce was unexpected. No yelling or squabbling about furnishings. Nothing like what happened to my buddy Jenny after her parents divorced. One day, Dad left, taking his tools and moving out with him. "I will always be here for you, princess," he murmured, holding me close. When Dad's alimony money initially arrived, Mom handled it rather well. She would grumble to herself that it wasn't enough while rolling her eyes. But that was all. Dad and I stayed at his tiny flat above the car repair shop on the weekends. He was attempting to get himself off the ground. I loved it, but the place usually smelt like coffee and motor oil. Then Mom met Richard around a year after the divorce. Sarah and Emma, his 2 kids, were both a few years younger than me. Mom's eyes gleamed like Christmas lights as she informed me about their engagement. Holding my hands in hers, she said, "Just think about it, honey. You'll have sisters. We will once more be a true family. Richard is an amazing man, and his children are quite lovely. Siblings are something you'll adore." I recall joyfully nodding in agreement with her enthusiasm. The way my mother portrayed them made my lifelong dream of having sisters seem like a dream come true. She painted scenes of sister bonding sessions and family game evenings, while spending hours discussing our future together. It was a modest, yet pleasant wedding. I had a basket of flowers with me and was dressed in a light blue outfit. Throughout the ceremony, Sarah and Emma, who were wearing similar pink gowns, continued to giggle and whisper to one another. They just glanced away when I made an effort to look them in the eye, in the hopes that they would include me in their inside jokes. I was so pleased when they moved in that I had trouble sleeping the night before. I had prepared welcome cards for each of them, tidied my room, and made place in the bathroom cupboard for their belongings. I arranged flowers in their rooms with Mom's aid. She kissed my forehead and remarked, "See, you're already being such a good sister." If only I had anticipated what was about to happen. Perhaps I would have put up a stronger fight to maintain the status quo. Perhaps I would have spoken my true feelings to Dad over Mom's second marriage. At the age of 11, however, I still thought that happy mixed families were the stuff of fairy tales. My fairy tale turned into a nightmare in precisely 3 days. After they moved in, on the 4th morning, as usual, I got up early to get ready for school, but the restroom door was locked when I attempted to enter. Sarah cried out in a sing-song voice, "Just a minute." 45 minutes passed. I knocked again, telling them I had to get ready for school, but all I could hear was laughter and the sound of the hairdryer, when they eventually emerged. Emma and Sarah wore identical dresses and were both immaculately groomed. It takes time to be beautiful. As they walked by me, Emma grinned. "You ought to be aware of it." "Well, perhaps you don't." Before the school bus arrived, I hardly had time to clean my teeth. We adopted that as our new morning ritual. While I waited, they were hogging the loo, usually hurrying or arriving late. However, the loo was only the first step. I tried to take my normal seat next to Mom at supper that evening, but Sarah had already claimed it. I started to object, but Mom interrupted me. "Tasha, why don't you sit over there, honey?" She gestured towards the chair that was the farthest away, adjacent to the table's edge. "It's only a chair. Don't fuss." I watched as Mom chopped the meat into beautiful pieces and asked whether Sarah and Emma wanted more juice before setting them down first. As she used to fuss over me, she's fussing over them now. As I silently picked up my meal, Richard smiled at the spectacle. Sarah's observation of my assortment of hair accessories made matters worse. The ones that I had purchased with my mother on our weekly shopping excursions. "Emma, take a look at them." Taking out my favorite butterfly clips, Sarah said, "On us, they'd look fantastic." I tried to reclaim those, saying they were mine. Girls ought to share. "Firmly," Mom said. "Tasha, avoid becoming avaricious. Emma and Sarah are now your sisters." Sarah and Emma then began referring to me as greedy Tasha, whenever grown-ups failed to pay attention. However, that was insufficient for them. My textbooks would inexplicably have pages that were ripped. Nail paint would inadvertently go on my clothing. My schoolwork would disappear, only to resurface in the garbage, crumpled. My mother would always shake her head in disapproval whenever I attempted to inform her. "Don't attempt to attract attention, Tasha. Making up stories about your sisters isn't the best way to deal with this shift, even though I understand it's difficult. I don't consider them sisters." One day, after discovering my favorite jumper with a giant hole in it, I finally snapped, earning a lecture on thankfulness and family from both Mom and Richard. The last straw, however, was when Mom said she was rearranging the bedrooms a week later. She clarified that Sarah and Emma require additional room for their belongings, not looking me in the eye. "Your room will be chosen because it has superior closets. Your belongings have already been relocated to the tiny room adjacent to the laundry." The little space was just a windowed wardrobe that had been elevated. My dresser and bed hardly fit it. Something inside of me cracked when I saw everything I owned packed into that small area. There was more to this than a room. It had to do with where I belonged in this family, or rather, where I didn't. Richard wasn't satisfied with only allowing his daughters to abuse me. Every small mistake I made had to include him. Became evidence that I was a challenging kid. I was pouting if I was silent. I was being disruptive if I raised my voice. I was unable to prevail. He would shake his head and remark, "Just like your father." Every time I failed to live up to his unattainable expectations, I caused trouble. Doesn't the apple fall close to the tree? The irony was that Dad's vehicle repair business was really doing rather well. Although it was difficult at initially, he was gradually establishing a strong reputation as a specialist in luxury automobiles. But I never mentioned this to Richard. Give him time to reflect. My lifeblood was spending weekends with my father. He would tell me stories about the luxury automobiles he was working on as we watched old films and ordered pizza. I would occasionally sit in his office while he completed papers, simply taking in the serene ambiance. "Princess, how are things at home?" Every now and again he would inquire, and I'd answer fine every time. He was working long hours to launch his firm, and he had plenty on his plate. He didn't need to be concerned about me either. The years passed slowly. I immersed myself into my studies, going to the library or hanging out with friends as often as I could. Anything to keep from coming home. Graduation from high school was quickly coming. I had applied to a number of universities. Most of them sent me letters of acceptance. I was ecstatic. A chance to escape at last, to begin anew. On the day following graduation, my excitement became uncontrollable. I made the decision to deliver my news when we were all seated at supper. I received acceptances from many universities. Taking out the acceptance letters, I made the announcement. Even received a few partial scholarship offers. Richard's chuckle sliced through my remarks like a dagger, and it wasn't a true laugh, even if I thought the business program was great. One of those ones that make you feel sick to your stomach. He scoffed at college. And just who will foot the bill for that? The person who barely manages to keep his small garage running is your worthless father. The letter seemed very heavy in my hands as I gazed at him. "I am eligible for loans and scholarships. Stop being so dumb," he said. "We won't co-sign any of your loans. We're putting money aside for Emma's and Sarah's schooling." I looked to my mother in the vain hope that she would defend me, protect me. For once, be my mother. She simply gazed at her dish. "Honey," she whispered quietly. "Richard's right. We must consider the girl's future." Something broke inside of me. All the years of being ignored, all the rejection, all the suffering, everything poured out all at once. "It's been years since you gave me any attention." I pushed away from the table and yelled, "Your only concern is making your beloved spouse and his ideal daughters happy. How recently did you inquire about my well-being? How recently have you behaved more like my mother than their stepmother?" The ensuing hush was deafening. Then there was the abrasive sound of flesh against skin. I was momentarily unaware of what had transpired, that I had been smacked across the face by my own mother. It hurt my cheek. The looks on Sarah's and Emma's faces, however, were more painful. In fact, they were grinning, obviously taking in the performance. Richard grinned contentedly as he sat there, as if he had been anticipating this. I felt the heat emanating from the spot where her hand had hit my cheek. Mom remained still. Her face, a mix of fury and something more, was still elevated by her hand. Startle. I left before I could find out. I hurried to my little room and began packing my luggage. Clothes, pictures, the few priceless items I still had that Sarah and Emma hadn't destroyed. Although I could hear activity in the home, nobody stopped over to see how I was doing. Nobody made an attempt to stop me. Nobody expressed regret. Before the adrenaline wore off and reality set in, I had gone about a block. I had no money, no plans, and nowhere to go when I was 18. I took out my phone and contacted my dad, my hands trembling. "Hello, Princess. What is going on?" I nearly burst at the sound of his upbeat voice. "Can you come fetch me, Ken?" Trying to maintain a steady voice, I managed to say, naturally, "You're where?" After 15 minutes, a beautiful black Mercedes briefly came up next to me. I believed I had given him the wrong address. This was not my father's vehicle, but there he was, smiling like my new vehicle through the open window. As he went out to assist me with my bag, he inquired, "Is this yours?" I gaped at him in shock. I mistook it for a customer's vehicle. He chuckled. That chuckle I'd known since I was a child. "Not at all. Last week, all of my purchased it. The business has been doing well." Then his face altered when he saw my baggage. "What's going on, Tasha? Why are you carrying a luggage out here?" The entire narrative poured out. The smack, Mom's treachery, Richard's derision. and the college acceptances. With every syllable, Dad's expression darkened. By the end, his knuckles were white from holding onto the steering wheel so tightly. He snarled and began to turn the car around, saying, "I'm going over there right now." "No, Father, don't, please." I took hold of his arm. "It's not worthwhile. All I want to do is go." After giving me a lengthy look, he nodded. "You're correct. Come on, let's get home." He'd learned over the years to make very good spaghetti over lunch at his apartment. Dad revealed yet another shocking revelation. Recall the luxury vehicle rental company's sleep contract that I was bidding on. I could see him nearly jumping with enthusiasm, despite his attempts to appear nonchalant. "Okay, I understand. Exclusive agreement for all of their fleet's upkeep. The company is definitely booming," he added right away. "And you know what else? I may have looked a little down considering my own predicament, even though I was very pleased for him. For years I had been setting aside as much money as I could for your education fund. Even with your scholarships, it's insufficient for an Ivy League institution. My spaghetti almost suffocated me. You've been putting money aside for my education." He clasped my hand as he reached across the table. "Yes, Princess, I have." For the first time that day, did you truly believe I would allow Richard to be correct about me? I began to weep. But these were tears of joy. I had spent all those years shielding my father from my troubles, and all the while, he had been secretly making plans for my future. I made the decision to hide my college intentions from my mother and her ideal family. Let them believe they had triumphed. In order to save some additional cash, I worked at the sweeping cafe downtown and lived with my dad over the summer. Then one afternoon, when the bell over the entrance rang, Sarah and Emma entered, dressed as though they were going to a fashion show rather than a coffee shop. In my sector, they took up residence in a booth. Naturally, they sneered as I walked up holding my notepad. Sarah drooled loudly enough for a client in the vicinity to hear. "It appears that someone has discovered their ultimate purpose." Emma laughed. "Yes. Before we leave for college in the autumn, we just wanted to know what the other half lives like. The ideal schools have already been chosen for us by Dad. Would you like me to take your order?" I suppressed a smirk while maintaining a professional tone of speech. If only they were aware. "Yes, you will most likely continue to take orders after we graduate," Sarah went on, looking at her well-trimmed nails. "Don't worry, however. When we come home from college, we could leave you some kind words." I simply grinned and noted down their intricate requests for half-calf extra hot drinks. Give them a chance. I was aware of my destination. I enrolled in college in the nearby state that autumn. I established a new life that was unrelated to my history, poured myself into my business studies, and made new acquaintances. Mom didn't call to say she was sorry for the smack or anything else. I also didn't give her a call. We spoke virtually every day, and Dad came over whenever he could. The 4 years went so quickly. I got a job at a marketing company in the same city as my college after graduating with honors. Although the starting wage wasn't very high, it was sufficient to live comfortably and rent a modest flat. I put forth a lot of effort, stayed up late, and took on more tasks. When the promotions began to come in, my supervisors noticed. A junior manager came first, followed by a senior management and a team leader. Each one included a pleasant wage increase. For the first time in my life, I was able to start saving a significant amount of money. Then one day my dad arrived at my flat with a huge smile. He had recently inked deals with 2 additional luxury automobile rental firms, and his company had grown to 3 sites. "I want this for you." Taking out a cashier's check, he said. I felt lightheaded from the amount. "The down payment is for your own home. Princess, you've put forth so much effort. This is something you deserve." I was moving into my own flat 2 months later. Not rented. Owned. There were more raises, additional promos. I began to consider purchasing a home, something that has a garden, in one of those peaceful suburbs outside the city, perhaps. Then my phone rang one night. Unknown figure. Tasha. The voice was tentative, yet familiar enough to make my stomach knot. "It is. Mom is here. It's probably time for us to speak. I want to make an effort to mend our relationship, all right?" I heard myself say. "Let's have a conversation." We decided to meet in a little cafe in the heart of the city, land that is neutral. I almost didn't recognize Mom when she entered. She appeared older. Are you worn out? A far cry from the capable woman who had selected her new family so many years earlier. She replied, You look fantastic, as she slid into the seat across from me. As she adjusted her serviette, her hands were trembling a little. Before the waitress delivered our coffee, we engaged in awkward small conversation about the weather and my employment. Then, after taking a big breath, Mom revealed the truth. She looked into her cup and murmured, I left Richard. In other words, he left me after we took out a mortgage to cover the girls' education expenses. I waited and let her go at her own speed. After they graduated, they pledged to assist with the payments. Bitterly, she laughed. However, they had justifications when the time came. Excuses are always made. The job market was difficult. They had to concentrate on their work. They were on their own. She used a shaking palm to wipe her tears. The home was lost. Gone go the year's worth of payments, Richard as well. He simply moved in with Sarah after packing things. Claimed he was unable to cope with the financial strain any longer. I started to say, Mom, but she raised her hand. Let me finish, please. I was mistaken. Tasha, I went with them instead of you. I allowed them to harm you. I caused you pain, and I'm really sorry. Her eyes were truly filled with tears. There was genuine tremble in her voice, and I found myself reaching across the table to hold her hand in spite of everything, including all the years of rejection and suffering. I pardon you. I surprised me by how much I meant what I said gently. I kept thinking about our chat about Mom being homeless and alone for the following 3 days, after giving all to those who didn't return the favor. In a way, it was karma, but I wasn't pleased about it. Rather, I experienced an odd blend of possibility and grief, an opportunity to be the larger person. On a Wednesday evening, I gave her a call. I had been considering purchasing a home. After we said hi, I said, something with a garden in the historic neighborhood. It could be too large for me alone. You might want to live there, though. I flew home to look for a property after taking a week off from work, discovered a stunning location just outside the town. With mature trees in the yard and a wraparound porch, it's simple, yet sturdy and inviting. When Mom saw it, she started crying. I thought my dad would be unhappy when he learnt about my choice. He shocked me instead. He gave me a firm embrace and added, Princess, you have a bigger heart than most. You have my admiration. The months that followed settled into a comfortable pattern. On weekends, I would fly in, spend time with Dad, and then see Mom at the new house. Slowly but surely, we were mending our friendship. She seemed happy, like the mother I had known as a youngster. I saw a few strange items in the residence on one visit, boots for men beside the entrance. There was a garment hanging in the hallway that I didn't recognize. Oh, it's only a pal. When I inquired, Mom replied fast, You are aware of the situation. At the time, I didn't give it much thought. Perhaps I ought to have. It was a Tuesday morning when the call came in. Aunt Carol's number appeared on my phone just as I was getting used to my new job. Tasha? With hesitation, she said, Honey, something is important for you to know. It has to do with your mom. She is doing fine. This residence is occupied by Richard. He was with his girls. Months ago, they moved in. I claimed that was not feasible. Just 2 weeks ago I was there. Mom was the only one, so she forces them to go before you come, Carol whispered softly. Every time you are due to arrive, they clear out. Marie, who lives next door, told me. For months now, she has been observing them come and go. What I had observed of those friends' possessions now made no sense at all. The jacket and the boots, the way my mother dismissed my inquiries. I hung up, thanked her, and made the reservation for the first trip home. No calls to Mom, no warning. I just picked up my laptop. I could work from anywhere, so I went to the airport. I arrived at the residence in my rental car on a Wednesday afternoon. The identical truck that Richard had owned all those years ago sat in the driveway. My key slid into the lock with ease. The kitchen scenario might have been taken directly from my adolescence. Mom was fussing over a pot of what smelt like Richard's favorite beef stew as she was at the stove in her favorite apron. At the kitchen table, Sarah and Emma looked much like their older, entitled selves. Richard is reading the newspaper in his typical recliner. Mom was the first to see me. Her wooden spoon fell to the ground with a clatter. Tasha. Her face turned pale. It wasn't until Saturday that I expected you. Evidently, I said in a very steady voice. Why are they in this place? Now we live here, Sarah said, smirking. We were invited by Mom. She understood that families should remain united. Family? I looked at my mother, who was using her apron to anxiously wipe her hands. They said they were sorry for all they had done to you, including taking your house away. Weakly, Mom remarked. Their goal is to put things right. Richard has changed. The females are different now. Remove them. Now I interrupt her. I want them to go since this is my house. No. Mom's face took on that old, unyielding expression as she straightened up. I want them here because I adore them. Admire them. What I was hearing was unbelievable. You got into debt because of them. You lost your home because of them. Do you still remember how they handled me? How they harassed me every day? How they ruined my belongings? Made my life miserable by stealing my room? Years have passed since then. Mom dismissed it with a wave of her hand. Back then, they were only kids. What about right now? I insisted. They left you after using you to pay for education. Richard abandoned you when times became difficult. How are you able to just forget that, since they are related? Mom's chin lifted defiantly as she protested. They are now regretful for their faults. Emma and Sarah looked at each other smugly. Richard simply sat there grinning with the same smug grin I had as a kid. All right, my voice was frigid as I spoke. Then, Mum, I'm offering you an option. Now, me or them? The ensuing quiet seemed to go on forever. I looked for traces of the mother I knew in my mother's face. The one who told me I could be everything I wanted to be, braided my hair, and kissed my skinned knees. At last, she responded, I choose them. Tasha, we're content together. Why are you unable to accept that? Something in me became permanently hard. You've got 2 days to leave my residence. You, everyone. This is not possible. A cry emerged in Mom's voice. Your mommy is me. I can't be thrown out. Observe me. I turned around and left. I could hear their conversations as I went down the driveway. I was back 2 days later. There had been no change. They were all seated in the living room as if they owned the property, and their cars were still in the driveway when I entered. I told you to go. I said. In fact, Mom departed, and I told you that I couldn't be thrown out. Your mommy is me. All right. After taking out my phone, I dialed 911. I'll then let the cops tell you about it. You wouldn't risk it. Richard began to get up from his seat. Hi there. Indeed. I need help getting unauthorized people off my land. I gave my address, obviously keeping in touch with my mother the entire time. The result was unsightly. Within minutes, the police showed up. When the cops said, yes, I could evict them, Mom yelled and sobbed. She no longer had the legal right to remain. Richard became furious and called me every derogatory term he could think of. Despite their phony grins and expensive clothing, Sarah and Emma participated in their real colors. That bitch is ungrateful. As the cops led them out, Mom let out a yell. After everything you've done for me, I've done the same for you. I observed them packing their automobiles with their possessions. Mom, name one thing. Since the day you married him, you have done one thing for me. For that, she had no response. Ed Carroll never asks, but he keeps me informed. They're having trouble paying the rent on their tiny flat across town. Richard is still unable to work. Emma and Sarah never come to visit. They were too preoccupied with their own life to give a damn about the mother who gave up all for them. Mom occasionally calls me late at night, but I never pick up. Most of the time, the house is unoccupied. I'm considering selling it, perhaps purchasing a property nearer to the city where I now reside. Something cozier, something smaller, something that has no remnants of the past. Story 3. I'm Jenna, and from the outside, my family appeared to be the ideal one. With a 3-car garage and a pool, our enormous home in the affluent area of town served as the home for my father's expensive cars. My dad started his business from the beginning and made it a prosperous firm that gave us everything we could possibly need. Diana, my mother, also made sure that everyone was aware of our triumph. I just have to get this new Gucci purse, darling. At least once a week, I would hear Mum repeat this to Dad. Since everyone at the country club has won, I am unable to use the model from the previous season. Dad would only grin. Without saying anything, take out his credit card and give it to him. It always went like that. Mom is inquiring. Dad is generous. Despite never having a job, she had a great sense of how to spend money. Each month included visits to far-flung resorts where she would share many pictures on social media, spa treatments, and brand new luxury clothing. In the meanwhile, I was mostly with a changing group of nannies. Like Mom going through purses, we went through them. She never felt that any of them were good enough. One nanny in particular, Miss Sarah, comes to mind. She was not like the others. She genuinely gave a damn about me. Not simply her salary. She would tell me tales, assist me with my schoolwork, and even teach me how to make cookies. She didn't stay long though, like everyone else. She was wearing one of my silk scarves when I saw her. One day, Mom made an announcement, but I was certain Miss Sarah would never do that. We really cannot have employees who are unsure of their roles. Everything changed when I was 14. In an attempt to seal a major deal, Dad had been working later than normal. Mom was organizing her upcoming Maldivian trip. Totally unaware of the lines of tension that are forming on Dad's face. The phone then rang one evening. Our marble corridors still reverberate with the sound of my mother's cry. Dad had passed out during work, a severe heart attack. They say it was too late by the time the ambulance came. My father was gone in an instant, and our idyllic world started to fall apart. The funeral was a haze of mourning whispers and black gowns. I watched numbly while my mother entertained all of the guests. I could see the terror in her eyes, even though she was playing the part of the grieving widow flawlessly. She was about to lose her way of life, not because she had lost her spouse. I realized we were doomed the day Mum entered Dad's office and took a seat in his chair. She adjusted her fashionable jacket, called a meeting of all the department heads, and twirled about in it a couple of times. She attempted to channel her inner CEO, and I observed from the doorway. All I saw, though, was a desperate lady dressing up. She told the skeptics in the room, "My husband has taught me everything there is to know about this business. We're going to grow this business to new levels." I felt like screaming. She had learnt nothing about business from her father. She had never been interested. Her participation with the firm was limited to planning the yearly Christmas party, but now she was announcing plans for growth and tactics for the market. She obviously didn't get it. She talked about her new position nonstop over supper that evening. "Jenna, were you aware of your father's extensive collection of intricate spreadsheets? Well, I've made things simpler. When you have instinct, who needs all those numbers?" I attempted to talk sense into Mom's head. "Perhaps you ought to get someone to assist with managing things. Someone with experience." She dismissively waved her hand. "Don't be foolish, sweetheart. I am doing really great. You ought to hear how my innate business sense has amazed everyone." They weren't impressed, though. I saw as seasoned workers began to leave one by one over the course of the following several months. Dad's trustworthy CFO was the first to go, followed by the operations manager, and, shortly after, the younger employees. In the meantime, I had heard hushed discussions concerning unpaid invoices, terminated agreements, and growing debt. Mom began using corporate funds for personal purposes, claiming she was entitled to them. In the role of CEO, she would just stroke my head and tell me, "You're too young to understand business, sweetie," when I asked her about it. Every family get-together turned into a platform for her hallucinations. "There has never been a greater corporation," she would brag to our family members. "I've made everything more current." James would be quite pleased. It would have appalled Dad. Even at the age of 15, I could tell that we were on the verge of catastrophe. Shortly before my 16th birthday, I suffered the ultimate blow. Mom had just acquired new office furniture for her growing company. When the bankruptcy notification arrived on a Tuesday morning, everything was lost. It wasn't enough to pay off the obligations, therefore the firm was sold. Next was our home. I watched as movers packed up Mom's fancy clothes and our opulent furnishings. On the outskirts of town, we moved to a little home that Mom used to drive by with her nose up in the air. My dad had saved the money for my education fund in a private trust that Mom couldn't access, so that was all we had left. She still made an effort, though. "Darling," Jenna would say. Voice, "Sweetheart? Nice. We could use that money right now, you know?" College may always be worked out later. That's for my schooling, Mum. Her expression would go gloomy. Following everything that I have done for you. How do you pay me back? By sitting on a mountain of wealth while you see your mother suffer. After these talks, she would ignore me for days, but I refused to back down. I had observed her ability to spend money rapidly, and for the following 2 years, I wasn't going to let her to ruin my future, dragged by frigid shoulders and purpose. The only conversation I had with Mom was about money. She made it plain that she would not celebrate my accomplishment when I eventually graduated from high school. Why should I host a graduation celebration for you? The morning of the ceremony, without raising her gaze from her coffee cup, she stated, "When your own mother is in need, you refuse to assist her." Barrett University had already accepted me, 3 states away, but a decent school. I'd picked it for the distance, but Mom wasn't aware of it yet. I informed her of my plans as soon as the graduation ceremony was over. "Are you leaving me?" After everything, she gasped and wildly clutched her chest. "Mom, I won't leave you. I'm attending college." Just how Dad desired. Barrett's dorm room seemed like paradise, even though it was much smaller than my previous one. No more quiet treatments, no more guilt trips. It's time to stop being cautious. I made as much use of my dad's money as possible. Used textbooks and inexpensive lunches, no vacations during spring break. I would make the required phone call home on every holiday. "Hello, Mother, how are you?" "Oh, living." She'd sigh and say, "Barely. I don't live off of a trust fund as other individuals do." I never got her initial call, not every 4 years. I didn't care, though. I was too preoccupied with creating my own life. I found a tiny flat in the city, got a job at Thompson Associates, and graduated with honors. My concentration shifted to work, and I excelled at it. Excellent. I had received 2 promotions in 2 years. And then there was the call. I was checking in as usual on this Christmas Day. "Once more, the heating is broken." Mom grumbled. "I can't even afford repairs, let alone groceries." "Don't worry about me, though. I'll simply eat crackers and wear 3 sweatshirts." Something changed within me. Perhaps it was because I had recently received another rise, or perhaps I was simply sick of feeling guilty. However, I heard myself add, "Next week, I'll come visit." I had a plan when I flew home. The home didn't appear as nice as I recalled. Old carpet, cracked gutters, and peeling paint. I recognized Mom's pained face as she opened the door. "At work, I'm doing well." "Over coffee?" I informed her. "I want to assist. We can make some repairs to the house if I give you $1,000 a month." Her eyes glowed as brightly as I hadn't seen them in years. The house received new carpets, new paint, and functional heat in a matter of weeks. Slowly, our new routine began. Mom would invite me to supper over the phone. Her voice was energetic and engaging. "Jen, I was considering taking you to that new Italian restaurant on Mason Street, sweetie. Just a great family supper, nothing special. Uncle Pete and Aunt Carol are invited." These dinners turned to become a habit. Mom would choose little eateries with wine lists that fit on one page, and dinners that didn't cost more than $30. We were alone at times. At other occasions, she might bring Uncle Pete, her old friend Martha, or her sister Carol. I never hesitated to pay the amount, which typically totaled around $200. At one of these dinners, my mother boasted about me for the first time, and I can still remember it. We were at Luigi's, a small family-run restaurant with candles in candy bottles and checkered tablecloths. Have I told you? Mom proudly told Ed Carroll that Janet had recently won the Anderson account, the largest client in the history of her business. In the corporate world, my daughter is a true force. That's how she inherits her father. It was pleasant, not like the way Mom used to boast about me when I was a kid, when I was merely a piece of her ideal existence. She was actually proud of what I had done on my own this time. The frequency of the meals increased. Every few weeks, Mom would phone and recommend new locations she had heard about. Nothing grandiose. She seems to be aware of the unwritten rule there. She would bring several sets of friends and family, intimate gatherings that were always kind and never arrogant. My career, meanwhile, was growing. I eventually saved up enough money for a down payment on a home of my own, closed bigger transactions, and received greater incentives. Despite being large, the mortgage was within my means. For once, Mom didn't comment on the size or location of my housewarming celebration when she attended. "Sweetheart, you've done so well," she murmured, giving me a hug. It seemed right to give Mom my old automobile when I got a new one. I had taken good care of the 5-year-old Lexus, and it was still in excellent shape. In any case, her old Honda was dying. The vehicle was only the first step. During one visit, I saw that she was using an outdated dial-up internet connection, so I made plans right away to have high-speed fiber installed. When I discovered she was keeping the house overly chilly in the winter to save money, I then began paying her energy bills. The really pivotal moment occurred when I organized my first trip to New York for work. I invited Mom, who had always wanted to see Broadway. Aunt Carol then added that she too had never visited New York. Before I knew it, I was purchasing 3 tickets. They were enthusiastic but not demanding, making them ideal travel companions. They were content with cozy mid-range lodgings and genuine neighborhood eateries. Instead of using cabs, we chose to walk everywhere, and they watched people for hours in Central Park. That initial journey established a standard. I would always bring my mother and 1 or 2 family members with me when I had to travel for work to places like Boston, Chicago, or San Francisco. While I was at meetings, they would amuse themselves. We would get together for supper and go exploring together when I had free time. I would sometimes surprise them with tickets to a theater or a beautiful dinner cruise. But they never begged for pricey concerts or shopping sprees. I had the impression that I was finally getting to know my actual mother, the person who may have existed all those years ago, if money hadn't so severely distorted her viewpoint. I was going over contracts at work on a Tuesday morning when I received the call. I had learnt to recognize the unique thrill in Mom's voice over the years. "Jen, my birthday is coming month, honey, and I've been thinking about it. I'm turning 55, don't you know?" "Naturally, Mom. My intention was to come down for it. Did you have any specific plans?" "Yes, indeed. This time, I want to celebrate in style. After all, it's a significant milestone. I got to work making plans right away. What about having a pleasant meal at your house? Carol and the regular bunch may be invited. Uncle Pete. Martha. I might get a caterer. We might arrange an order from your favorite Italian restaurant." "Oh no, sweetheart," she interrupted me. "None of it should concern you. This time, I want to make all the arrangements myself. You've helped me a lot lately. Let me celebrate my birthday on my own." I should have been alerted by something in her tone. However, I was simply pleased to see her take charge. "Are you certain? I have no problem lending a hand." "Completely positive. Simply arrive at 7 o'clock. I'll text you the address of the restaurant." I arrived early on the day and booked into my normal hotel. When my cab arrived at Le Chateau, the priciest restaurant in the city, I didn't give it much thought that Mom had texted me an address I didn't recognize. The type of establishment where bookings must be made months in advance, and the menu does not include pricing. The head waiter escorted me to a huge private area at the back of the main dining room, past the gold-leafed walls and crystal chandeliers. There, on a number of tables covered in immaculate white linen, my heart stopped. Sat a minimum of 30 individuals, all of our relatives as well as what appeared to be half of Mom's social circle. "Jen." Mom hurried over. Her eyes were shining with tears. Her favorite pricey perfume filled the air as she embraced me tightly. "You being here makes me very pleased." Astonished, Carol reached across the table and gripped my hand as I allowed myself to be escorted to a seat. She said, "You're such a wonderful daughter. You insisted on giving her this fantastic party, and your mother couldn't stop raving about it. I've heard that the Wagyu beef will be served next, and the foie gras is delicious." The realization made the room seem to whirl. Mom had not just planned her own birthday celebration. Without even informing me, she had planned a lavish celebration and wanted me to cover the costs. Watching dish after plate of outrageously costly food come at the tables made my stomach flip. Waiters poured $500 bottles of wine like tap water, gliding between gasps. I saw what I knew was $400 per plate of Japanese Wagyu meat, caviar that was imported. From Maine, whole lobsters are flown in. I felt lightheaded from a rapid mental calculation, at least $8,000, perhaps more. Carol got to her feet, holding a champagne flute and tapped it lightly with her silver spoon. Conversation subsided as the crystal ring reverberated around the intimate dining room. "I want to raise a glass." With a radiant smile, she declared, "To Jenna, my lovely niece. You are a wonderful daughter, as seen by your kindness tonight, how you've looked after your mum, and now this amazing festivity. I apologize." With a little shudder, I cut in my voice. "However, I must stop you there." There was silence in the room. The smile on Mom's face froze. This supper was not planned by me. I kept glancing around the space. I didn't pick this eatery. I didn't approve any of these costs. Actually, this is the first time I've heard of any of it. Gasps echoed across the crowd. The sound of a fork hitting a plate was heard. "Jenna?" Mom's cheeks flushed as she screamed. "Avoid being absurd. You're paying for this, of course. Would anybody else?" Slowly, my chair scuffed the marble floor as I got to my feet. "I'm not, Mom. I offered to order from your favorite Italian restaurant or host a lovely meal at your house. You expressed a desire to manage things on your own. You always pay, but you never brought up the chateau or invited 30 guests." She sputtered. "Everything has been paid for by you, for sensible reasons. Standard eateries, standard bills. Not like this." I pointed to the lavish spread. "A blank check is not what I owe you. Not grateful." Mom's voice broke. "After everything you've done for me, I've done the same for you." There was no humor in my laughter. "Do you mean attempting to blow my education fund or ruining my dad's business?" There was an overwhelming quiet in the room. I took out my wallet from my purse and counted out $200. Putting the bills on the white tablecloth, I remarked, "This covers my pork chop and glass of wine. I wish you luck on the remaining tasks." With my heels clicking like a countdown against the marble floor, I left without turning around. I got no calls. No one made an effort to stop me. The night air slapped me in the face. I stepped out into the street. The first cab I saw, I grabbed and pointed it in the direction of my hotel. I switched off my phone as soon as I got to my room. I was aware that it would soon begin to ring. Mom's irate phone calls, relatives' disappointing messages, and requests for explanations. But I just wanted stillness for the moment. I watched the city lights sparkle through the glass while handshaking on the edge of the motel bed. I felt genuinely alone and oddly, deliciously free for the first time in years. When I switched on my phone the following morning, it almost burst. The alerts continued to arrive. Mom missed 47 calls, Aunt Carol missed 28, Uncle Pete missed 15, and several other relatives missed hundreds more. The voicemail was overflowing. I phoned my mother after taking a big breath. The first ring caught her attention. "I apologize for the events of last night, Mom." I began to attempt to speak steadily. "Now I'm coming over. We must discuss the events in the restaurant." Sincerely, I hoped she would compromise. That perhaps, just possibly, she would see how improper it was to plan such a lavish celebration without consulting anybody else. I was completely mistaken. "You dare." I had to keep the phone away from my ear because her cry was so loud. "You ungrateful, egotistical, and self-centered creature. Are you aware of what you have done? If you simply told me about it, Mom. I was totally embarrassed in front of everyone by you. After you rushed away like a spoiled brat, do you know what happened? To pay the cost, each person had to contribute $400. $400! It came to $12,000 in all. $12,000. And you didn't even bother to pay for your own mother's birthday, despite having a lot of money. You avaricious jerk." My mind whirled $12,000. After I departed, they placed further orders. "Mom, do you think I'm greedy? All right, I'll demonstrate greed to you." Mid-round, I ended the call. My hands had stopped shaking. Rather, as I opened my laptop, a chilly clarity descended upon me. I started by going into my bank account and stopping the $1,000 monthly automated payment to her account. I then gave the vehicle dealership where I bought my previous Lexus a call. "I'm Jenna Mitchell. Hello. I have to make arrangements for a car to be picked up. My name is still on the automobile." A tow vehicle was en route to Mom's house 20 minutes later. I accessed the website of the internet service provider. Her fast connection was set to terminate after 3 clicks. At last, I logged into my social media accounts and began typing. A significant announcement for my relatives. I shall no longer be paying for my mother's or my family members' travels or costs as of right now. All prior plans have been canceled. Going ahead, please organize your own journey. I shut off my laptop and pushed post. I felt as though a chapter in my life was coming to an end. There was nuclear fallout. My social media alerts were inundated with responses within hours of my post, from family members who had been delighted to appreciate my kindness just days earlier. How could you harm your own mother in this way? After everything she gave up for you, Carol wrote, "You're nothing more than a money-hungry, self-centered ingrate." Uncle Pete said, "Your father would be ashamed of what you become." Uncle Pete had accompanied us to San Francisco only 2 months prior. Did he raise you to desert your family in this way? The remarks continued, more poisonous than the prior one. Just last year, my cousin Rachel, whom I had assisted in moving into her new flat, posted, "Don't bother attending my September wedding. On my particular day, I don't want someone so cold-hearted." Ed Carroll delivered another hit after that, and next month's celebration of my 60th anniversary is off the table. We don't require your presence or your money. Seeing how fast they forgot all the meals, all the travels, and all the occasions when I picked up the bill without thinking twice was quite intriguing. I was now the antagonist in their tale, the avaricious daughter who had disconnected her impoverished mother. They had to share a $12,000 dinner bill, but none of them brought it up. None of them asked why. Without consulting the person she anticipated to pay, Mom had invited 30 guests to a restaurant with dinners starting at $300. According to their account, that was irrelevant. The initial weeks were the most difficult. To keep my thoughts busy, I poured myself into my job and took on extra assignments. My phone was constantly beeping with messages from unidentified numbers and family members attempting to contact me via various phones. After my blocking of them, I updated my phone number. I would occasionally lie awake wondering if I had made the correct decision. However, I would then recall all the instances in which my mother had deceived me. The guilt trips, all of them. The never-ending demands, disguised as affection. The birthday meal wasn't the only instance. It was just the clearest manifestation of a pattern that has existed all along. Mom made an effort to get in touch 2 months after the restaurant event. She left a voicemail on her neighbor's phone. "Can we chat, Jenna, honey? You are missed. It has been challenging. We might get together for coffee." Only us? In some way, her voice seemed smaller and less confident. There was a part of me that hoped she had changed and now understood. Then I realized she hadn't apologized yet. What she had done was not acknowledged, not accepting accountability. Just another effort to entice me back. I also blocked the number. Life continued. At work, I received another promotion. Without the ongoing burden of providing for Mom and other family members, my pay went farther than I could have ever dreamed. I traveled to Europe by myself. This time, there are no family members to host or expectations to satisfy. It was freeing. I occasionally learned tidbits of my mother's life from social media or from common connections. She had to move to a smaller location and downsize once again. She gripes about her unappreciative daughter abandoning her to anybody who would listen. Naturally, the family members all feel sorry for her, but it's fascinating to note that none of them have volunteered to help her the way I did. Do I long for a mother? Occasionally. However, I long for the mother I required, not my. I miss the concept of family, but not the actual state of my family. When I eventually had enough, a group of users who were all too eager to accept everything I had to offer condemned me. Mom could have a true enlightenment one day. Perhaps she will realize that there should be no cost associated with love. Financial transactions are not the focus of that family. Perhaps she would issue a sincere apology that demonstrates her real comprehension of the damage she has caused, rather than one that is accompanied by demands or excuses. When that time arrives, I could be amenable to re-establishing a connection of some sort, one that is respectful of one another and has distinct limits. Even yet, I will never again be the family's ATM. I've permanently closed that chapter of my life.